Welcome to the Onchain India Podcast. We have a very special guest with us. We have Sreeram from EigenLayer. I think Sreeram or EigenLayer doesn't need an introduction. They have been doing some massive strides in the past, few years, and I think we are all blessed with the kind of innovation and the kind of trajectory Eigen has been going in through. Welcome, Sreeram, to this Onchain India Podcast.
Thank you so much, Pratik. It's a pleasure to be here on Onchain India. Really excited to talk to you about all the things we are doing and all the things we should be doing to take India on-chain.
Got it. Sreeram, let's start with, why the Web3 part of it, right? I mean, you coming from, sort of an educational background where you've been as a professor, what motivated you? Because I'm pretty sure when you were taking the choice whether to come into this Web3 or not, what were those few instances where you said, hey, this is what, I want to take my next steps or devote my, this thing for?
Yeah, I'll start with a story from before. For example, when I was in interviewing for a faculty position at Caltech, way before I got into crypto, I was working on computational genomics. And one of the questions in the interview was, hey, I was working on some DNA sequencing stuff at that time. And then they said, suppose you figure out all this DNA sequencing thing, or somebody else invents some new technology that makes this really easy. What would you do? I said, oh, I'm, operate out of curiosity. Maybe I'll do something else. And they said, no, suppose I give you all the resources in the world. You can have whatever equipment, laboratory funding that you want. You can get the best talent in the world. And you have 30 years. What will you do? And the scale of this question was kind of mind-boggling to me, because normally we always think with our own constraints. We think, oh, we are here. What is the next step that we can take? It's important to have that thinking, but it's also useful to have this unconstrained thinking. Suppose there are no constraints, what would you do? And I didn't have an answer at all at that time. I said, I have no idea. Then, of course, I didn't get the job, but I came back and I started thinking about this question. And this is a thing that I've always had. And, I had one such, program, 30-year program in genomics. And so I wouldn't, and, when I got introduced to crypto and entrepreneurship, I wouldn't move that easily unless I'm convinced that there's a 30-year program here. And the thesis that I kind of came to was the just like in the internet became our communication superhighway, crypto can become our coordination superhighway, where people can coordinate with each other without needing to trust each other. And if that's the case, that's a huge evolutionary upgrade to humans. And so that was kind of like the driving lens of why I was interested. And then initially I was doing this all inside the University of Washington, running a blockchain lab and so on. But one of the things I found is as you tune the dial to real world impact, it makes sense to follow, hey, where is it that I have to be situated in order to actually maximize impact? And that kind of naturally drew me into entrepreneurship and various failed startups before I did EigenLayer's.
Got it. Also, Sreeram, I think one of the fundamental questions when it comes to a lot of these young developers and entrepreneurs is while choosing the idea, right? I mean, because there are say 4 to 5 different areas where they feel, hey, this is a great opportunity, which could be done. But again, there are a lot of questions in their mind, whether, this is scalable or, tech-wise, is it possible, or GTM-wise would be able to crack or fight these bigger giants or something like that. So when you stumbled on the EigenLayer, what was the mental model? And then you said, okay, hey, this is what, I want to go after. And how was that thought process?
That's always really interesting and tricky. So originally we started with let's go improve these blockchains because you can do like various things. So as an academic, we went to Bitcoin, Ethereum, and said, hey, maybe you can upgrade yourself using these kind of protocols. But these systems either are never change or change very slowly. So the only option was, oh, you have to go start your own layer one blockchain. And if you think about it like that, that's such a hard thing to do. And we realized it's a hard thing to do, but actually trying to do it. So we started a blockchain. Let's start our own layer one blockchain, and which never launched. But that process taught me a lot about how hard it is for somebody to go get a new network started up. And so that was a failed startup. But I learned a lot from that. And the next time I said, okay, instead of starting very technology heavy, which is what we did with starting layer one blockchain, I said, this time let me just start something from where there is action, market interest. And so we were actually going to build an NFT marketplace. I was an advisor to Dapper Labs, which built Flow and onboarded NBA, Top Shot, and many others. So we were like, okay, let's build something there. And that time, it brought me to like deep understanding of what the market is, who are these users, what applications are being built, what are the missing pieces. As we were building it, we realized, oh, there is, when you build an NFT, like how do you get a price oracle? How does this oracle work? How does a bridge work? What is the trust model for this? Where is the network that powers this? I want to run some AI to like mutate these NFTs. Like, where do I run it? All of these things became clear. And the thing that became clear to me is like the meta problem, which is there a kind of like a trust layer that can underwrite all the other layers built on top? And so that kind of naturally led to EigenLayer. But what this tells me is like, it's not okay, I have a great idea and I'm just going to do it. No, you can have like some very high level North Star, like coordination, acceleration. But then like all the micro things that you do, they have to be very tuned to what the market is, finding a pathway, finding a kind of like a empty space. And that's not easy. Needs a lot of iteration. And so when somebody starts as an entrepreneur, they try their first thing and then it fails. It's expected. It's expected pretty much everything fails, right? Like, I don't know, fails as in like it didn't take off, but you learned a lot, you improved, your team grew, you grew, like that's the whole game. And then like you keep improving beyond that.
Truly, yeah. I think thanks for going in that. I just before this call, I was on a call with a founder. I think who is in the similar phase where he's tried like multiple things and things are not just clicking. For some reasons, and I think if you look at that point, because he's feeling like he's getting like a lot of emotions, it's very hard for him to take a step. But eventually, you have to cross through that journey to understand, this thing, right? And otherwise the experience doesn't come. Otherwise you don't know the depth of what you're getting into and stuff. So I think in a natural way it's good that you're getting a lot of harsh feedback or things are not working out, because ultimately that will lead you to the next sort of things.
I think that's another like really important thing that I learned, kind of humility towards the things that work. Okay, so earlier I used to have this thing that crypto, like people are just doing some nonsense stuff, like this kind of attitude. And then now my attitude is, if something is working, there is a good reason underneath why that's working. It's your job as an entrepreneur to like decode why is it working, and then extract it out, and then use it to improve your own models, and then go apply it to actually like make it better. And this is so, for example, every time I've, because of these multiple failed startups, I've done a lot of pitches that like fail. Every time I'll come back and I'm like, okay, like this is what these guys said. What can we learn from it? Can we update our models? Can we do something different? What is the kind of like net learning, instead of saying dismissing it and saying, oh, these guys, they're. So I think that's one important thing. The second one we learned is, as you're the initially when you're trying to find the right thing to build. The normal thing, a lot of people, especially in crypto, this is a lot, is you try to like build something that VCs will fund. I think this is a horrible idea in general. So you want to find something that builds something people want. You want to find something that actually there is some customers for whom it makes sense. And so when we did Eigen Labs, I decided, okay, like this time I'm not even going to wait for funding or anything like that. I'm just going to put all my money in. And I basically came very close to like burning all my money and being under debt before it took off. So that also brings a certain amount of discipline and like, direction that otherwise may not exist.
Truly. One other part, Sriram, I think, specifically in this sort of a startup journey is, the fundraising aspect of it, right? And it consumes like lot amount of time and mental, strength of a lot of founders. And specifically, I think, coming to the India part where we don't have, a lot of homegrown venture funds, because of regulatory or, like tens of other reasons. The founders who are starting from here, essentially their first check is somewhat like hackathon prize or some grant, which is coming on. So that's like essentially first, few $1,000s coming in. But if they are seriously looking to build, either they have to step into Singapore, Hong Kong area where say there are 5, 6 other VCs, or tap into the US markets, where we have some, really good amount of VCs coming in. And what happens is, because as a biological structure, you're dealing with essentially a different set of mindsets of people which are not native to it. It becomes very hard to explain the vision or to incalculate what kind of things that are being doing. And we've seen like such a great amount of entrepreneurs who have spent a lot of time in doing that, and then after a year they get into their tune, and but till then a lot of factors come into play. So obviously fundraising itself is a bit hard because you got to mix and match and do all of the things, but also convincing some other kind of things is also very hard. Now, through your experience, because as you said, you've tried out different ideas, and Eigen was like initially the successful one. Throughout your journey, what would be your advice, specifically to someone who is starting now in India, considering all the factors? What would be the ideal, fundraising approach would be?
Yeah, I don't have deep context on the startup scene and fundraising in India, but I can give like some high level pointers on what might be the most productive ways to go about it. Firstly, when you're thinking about the startup, you think about like build something people want. Like what is it? Who's your customer? And are you inhabiting deeply the customer persona? Do you know like precisely what they want? And are you like solving something that they really love? Like this is the first thing that one should be thinking about. And if you don't have a good answer for this, if you don't inhabit the customer's persona, it's always going to be very difficult to like build something. For example, EigenLayer, so the NFT marketplace is an example. NFT marketplace is built for NFT buyers and sellers. I myself was not an NFT buyer and seller, and neither was any of the core members in our team. So what this meant is we had a huge amount of knowledge gap on what does it mean to be a good, an NFT marketplace, because I don't know who these people are that I'm selling to. Whereas EigenLayer, as an example, is a platform which is built for, infrastructure builders. And that's exactly the persona that we are. So we know exactly what it is. In fact, we built the first infrastructure on top of EigenLayer, which is EigenDA. So, okay, this is insofar as build something people want. Why am I saying this first? Because if you do this, VCs follow. If you build something that people really, really want, VCs follow. And so that's the first kind of like meta thing. There are things that, when it's going to take a long time for something to be built before you can show that there are customers who really want it. But lots of things are not like that. Lot more things are, many things you can build and get people really want it before you need to like raise a lot more capital. So that's the first thing, get customers before you go to VCs. This is the best like proof point for why a VC should invest. So second one is, a lot of the other thing I see in developers is build something useful but has no long lasting value. Like this is a big error mode of like, a developer, a hacker mindset. Hey, I'm going to build something and then it's useful, therefore it has value. No, just because it's useful, it doesn't mean it has value, because it needs to be useful and it needs to have some mechanism why like it has a scaling law, or like as more people come to it, there's a network effect, there is some kind of long-term value to it. So I think about, when answering adoption questions, what is the bootstrapping? How do you get it started when you're nothing, nobody, like day zero? And what is equilibrium, right? In the long run, how will it look like? If you get all the customers, why will they stay there? Why wouldn't they just go to another platform? Why would you have any kind of pricing opportunity? Like all of this stuff needs to be thought about. I think this is the pure developer mindset is hack something, make it useful. Oh, I have 1,000 people using this. But then like it doesn't have any like network effect, any long-term value that accrues into it. So build something people want, figure out like how to bootstrap it, as well as how the long-term like value accrual works. Then you have like some product. And long-term value accrual doesn't mean exact business model, right? Like, Yahoo, Google didn't know like what the business model is, but like as you get more users, more searches, more attention flow, you get more websites, more indexing, then you get more people coming in. So you have these positive flywheels that are flying. And then you can figure out how to kind of like monetize or like add a business model on top of it.
Got it. I think the next interesting thing, or few other statistics also, what we have seen, Sreeram, is one is your seed round getting completed. Okay, now you come to a point where you have, say, 2 to 4 million kind of thing to experiment. You have raised your first round. And now, the founder wants to scale it, right? Because that's the most difficult, I feel, right? Because 0 to 1 is okay, you conquer, there are early believers and stuff. But now the real game starts, right? Because people are expecting, some crazy output, to be coming because you've raised the money and stuff to go on. And there's a lot of pressure as well, to get things delivered. You've got team, you've got a lot of operational expense and stuff, to manage all these things out. What is your advice? And since you've gone through this phase, from that 1 to 10, kind of a journey, and specifically, I'll also add some part to this question. When is the right time, do you think, to launch the token through this as well? Because, it's a very difficult question. We have seen some crazy use cases where high FTV, low FTV, sort of situations, you don't know how does it take care of it and stuff. But how do you manage, post your first fundraise thing, the next step, specifically in the crypto fundraising?
Yeah. I think when you so you have done your fundraise, you have like now building a team. The one like really useful model that is worth keeping in mind as an entrepreneur is so whoever is the founder or is the founding team, have somebody who is visionary, who's like product minded, who's thinking about the long term. But also you need an integrator who's operational, who's thinking carefully about how to make sure that the org is being built, how to think carefully about finance, how to think carefully about legal, and all this stuff. And having these two, and usually you don't find these two in the same person, right? It's very difficult. So it's likely two different people, and you need, as if you're a founder who's on one side or the other side, you may be very focused on operations, then you want to find somebody who's thinking long term, long range. If you're somebody who's thinking about like problem solving it, but like somebody who thinks about the org, you need these two complements to kind of go together. So making sure your team has those elements is the first thing. I used to consistently feel like drowning before I found like somebody who's a deep operational person you can hand off like most of the operational task. And so that's a very important like up leveling that a team should do. Then, you have expectation management, right? And this is really tricky, and it's more tricky in crypto than elsewhere, because what you would normally hear is under promise and over deliver. Like that is the nominal phenomena. You don't claim too much, be modest in your claim, but actually like exceed expectations. So you're setting yourself up for success. But crypto is a weird place. It's also an attention economy, like where, you need to draw more people's attention. So one way to draw more people's attention is by making big claims. So you have this like these two things which are kind of conflicting, which is how do you build how do you underpromise over deliver versus like how do you build a narrative or like a whole area around it. So this is consistent friction, so you need to kind of like use discretion to navigate it. So the idea would be to present a long-term vision picture area, like, hey, this area is going to be big and we are doing these small things. So if you can simultaneously straddle that big picture of like, hey, all these things need to happen and we're doing these things today so that those things can happen in 10 years. So I think it's hard. We fail ourselves, so I'm not in a great position to give great advice, but that's something that you can do. On the token, I think, the area is very in the area, like, token is very useful as a mechanism in your mechanism design for aligning all the different market participants, giving community ownership, all of that. So think about like the if you had this like power today, like what would you do with it, right? If your team or foundation or whatever had this equipment to actually create alignment across these different things, what can you do today? What sets of things can you do today without having that token? Because this thing is an absolute, if there's any one-way door in crypto, it's the token. So once you open it and once you're inside it, there's no going back. There's no like other option. Like there is just, you can't get acquired. You can't like, you're giving up a lot of alternative opportunity to like just walk into that door. And so you want to make sure that you're going through the door, you're 100% sure that you're just all into it. And so that, I think, thinking through mechanics of what can be done pre-token to like get all the different participants aligned and make sure that they are, whether that's off-chain deals or like, you make deals with people or you get like other, points or whatever mechanics to make sure people are interested, create narratives, Twitter, whatever the thing is. But I think it's a useful tool, very powerful, but nobody knows how to, tame it or time it. We've gotten like hit ourselves by this bigger force because, it's a thing you don't control. It's just something that, it's kind of like a wild beast. So that's how I think about the token. It's a huge amount of time and effort to think about how to do it right. So don't do it prematurely.
Got it. Great piece of advice, Sreeram. Coming, to the end part of the podcast, obviously, also wanted to, deep dive into the Eigen part of it, right? I think you guys have seen like an incredible home run. I mean, it's like the natural, tick mark to every stages, right? First round, second round, then big, $100 million round, or the token is launched. You've got some amazing, developers fan base who are like really excited, and I see the energy when I speak to people. Despite over here, I mean, there are so much founders who are very impressed with the sort of tech stack, which is being done, and the kind of openness and decentralization, sort of narrative that helps them, achieve their goals. How does the Eigen journey look like, for next 1 year? Because now the token is launched, the main things which would have to go on now, it is out. So how do you perceive, Eigen from two perspective? One is from the product suite perspective. What are the crazy things that are coming up? And also more from statistics numbers. Do you have anything in mind that, we want to achieve XYZ, and probably what are the strategies for it?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you think about like our, I started with the reason I got into crypto is accelerate coordination. And if you think about coordination mechanisms, usually you have things like governments act as coordination mechanisms, right? So they're on money, right? These are coordination mechanisms from, hundreds of years old. And I think of like crypto as accelerating coordination mechanisms because you can now coordinate with anybody on chain on these self-enforcing rules. So you don't need to trust anybody. And so that EigenLayer is designed as the layer of decentralized trust, right? Like, so that's the, the core principle that we built for. So when you think about a layer of decentralized trust, what sets of things should it power? That's a question that we think a lot about. So starting from that view, you can ask this question, it's okay. So you have decentralized trust. Who's the end consumer of this decentralized trust, right? So you have, you can have, right now, our market structure is we have stakers. People put down stake and make a promise that they're going to like underwrite some decentralized trust. You have operators who bring computational resources and run nodes. And then you have AVSs, actively validated services, which are services that run on this decentralized trust network. And then like somebody needs to come in and consume these services, right? So we have all kinds of crazy new infrastructure primitives, right? We have okay, so before I go into that, the fourth bucket there, which is what is there beyond AVSs, just looking at the journey of these three and where we are, right? Stake, we have like 10 plus billion of stake on EigenLayer. Operators, we have like all kinds of operators, from home operators to Google Cloud, all of them running nodes on EigenLayer. And then we look at AVSs, which is actually like one of the hardest categories to create, because we have to convince developers that, hey, you don't worry about like your trust network. Like we're just gonna do it. And when you build a new AVS, you're basically saying, hey, I'm building to this very specific new protocol, and it's a big deal. So I didn't expect we'll have this kind of like a AVS economy at this stage. We have 18 AVSs on mainnet, 40 on testnet, and 100 plus in various stages of development. So it's a huge and thriving economy of AVSs. So the next thing is, okay, you have all these infra primitives, and in these AVSs, actually, like 1.5 years back, I gave a talk on what are the categories in which AVSs should be built, and we have 30 categories. Every one of them, there's now like more than one projects building those categories. So that's a pretty amazing outcome. Okay, what is that beyond that? Beyond that is applications need to come in that can use these services and build something interesting on top. And so I think of this thesis as like apps with commitments. Why do you build a crypto app? So we need to like, if we want to grow the whole crypto market cap, we need to know like what is the new thesis for why even people should be building crypto apps. I call this apps with commitments. The idea is an application is making commitments to its users that even it can't break, right? Like, why is Bitcoin a thing? Bitcoin is a thing because it's making a commitment to users. There's only 21 million Bitcoin. You own your Bitcoin, right? These are the commitments that the system's making to its users. Why do you use Uniswap? The system's making a commitment that you can find the fair market price of an asset. That's the commitment, right? To enforce this commitment, there's all kind of decentralized trust, and like it's a smart contract on top of Ethereum, and Ethereum should have censorship, all this stuff. Like that's all in the back end, but this is really the commitment that a user is getting. Similarly, a lending market, you come in, you're getting the assurance that the borrower is solvent, right? If I know that the borrower is solvent, I can lend freely because I can lend all my assets because there's no risk. But this is the commitment. But to get this commitment, you need like something like Aave, which like runs on Ethereum, borrows censorship resistance, has its own Oracle and liquidation mechanism, all this stuff. Thinking of this apps with commitments and how all these AVSs can underwrite some sets of commitments for these apps. That's something that we're putting a lot of thought into. And one category that we are very excited about is AI. Because, there is, so when you think about who's going to use all these commitments, AIs need a lot of powerful off-chain compute because you can't run it on chain. So you need off-chain compute and decentralized trust networks that can actually underwrite it. And so we see like a huge category coming up of things like AI agents that can take advantage of the kind of complex infrastructure pieces that have been built on our island.
Got it. Really, excited to see, these sort of updates and some applications, which are using or built on Eigen. We've already seen like, tons of, founders pretty excited and, can't wait to see once they get live. And obviously, they go through that journey of token launches and we some, sort of crazy applications built. Shyam, coming to the last question, right? So if, say, you were to hypothetically start today, like just fresh mindset, given the circumstances, I mean, this has been like a very important day today because of the elections and the positive things, which have been promised, hopefully in the regulations part of it. What would be the top 2 or 3 ideas, that come to your mind where you see, okay, there's a good opportunity, where these things can be done?
Yeah, I think like the kind of the main thing that happens with regulatory clarity is more people are going to be willing to come into the crypto space. Okay, so that's going to happen. And same thing with AI, like the less regulated, more open kind of a AI regime is going to basically mean we are going to see a lot of like AI development happen in the next 4 years. So that's the kind of like macro scenario. So if you're starting to build something today, I think the questions that you should ask yourself are, number one, now that I think a lot of the crypto infrastructure is available, what new applications does it unlock? What new credible commitments can I make? For example, I'm building a competitor to Uber. Can I use these like really interesting services that are on EigenLayer or other places to build an app that's highly competitive? For example, we have a service on EigenLayer called Opacity and Reclaim, which are basically services which let you prove what your Uber rating is to a blockchain. Like you are a 4.9 rated driver on Uber, I can now prove that to a blockchain, which means now this gives rise to like a possibility of, hey, I can actually run a vampire attack on Uber on a blockchain, right? So using this blockchain substrate. So the set of things that you can do have suddenly expanded, and most people have not realized this. Similarly, we have many protocols building encrypted computation on EigenLayer, like FHE, Phoenix, and Inco are 2 projects building on EigenLayer. And so FHE is this like unlock where I can now use encrypted computation. I can directly do computations on encrypted data. So I don't need to tell anybody what is happening, but I can actually make sure that things are all like accurate. So what products can you build on top of it? Third one, AI, right? Like, so how are you going to use AI to accelerate what you're building and to actually like, even maybe the end user of your product is not humans. The end user of your product are things like agents. So these are all the kind of like high level things. The impact of privacy, the impact of these kinds of powerful tools where I can kind of draw and do even vampire attack on major cloud giants. And number 3, like the impact of AI. So that would be the 3 themes that I would consider if I'm starting today.
Got it. Thanks, Sreeram. I think this was, really wonderful, sort of conversations, and I'm pretty sure this will inspire, a lot of our young developers and entrepreneurs who are looking to take this giant, big vision. Entrepreneurship is hard, startup building is hard. There's so many obstacles, and we definitely need, such sort of boosters where we see some success stories, getting built, and hopefully, we'll see some great examples coming out of this. Thanks
so
and
much,
appreciate
Pratik.
it.
Really excited that you're running this Onchain India podcast and excited to engage with this community even deeper. Thank you.